closing is the fifth and final component of the project management processes. Project closing is often overlooked. Project closing is often poorly done on most projects. Most projects, by the time they reach the closing stages, where we actually close the project, are often, and I hate to say this, so over budget, so beyond schedule, that people simply say, phew, we finally got the product done, we finally have acceptance, or maybe even don't go as far as getting acceptance, we finally have the project done, let's get this team redeployed, let's get this team reworking on something else so that the organization can again begin to reap benefits from a new project being initiated and the results of the new project being done. So project closing, actually closing the project, often does not take place on a project. I would like to suggest that's a very bad approach, a very bad attitude for an organization to take. Why is project closing very important? As we'll discuss in this nugget, project closing ensures that A, the project is truly accepted, that there are no flaws, there are no outstanding items that the business needs addressed to make it fully functional, but B, from a project management viewpoint, and I think more importantly, that the organization has a chance to learn from the project, that we have a chance to review the mistakes made, assuming you did make mistakes, or to review the good things done so that we can repeat good things and avoid repeating mistakes. We need to close the project, gather our lessons learned, consolidate the lessons learned, and distribute them throughout the organization so that future projects will repeat the good things and future projects will hopefully avoid making the same mistakes. Closing the project, project closing, is typically a very brief, does not need to take weeks, can even be done in days, or if truly, truly pressed, could be done in hours, but I think most projects should have days, probably less than a week, to formally close the project and ensure that the organization is going to benefit from a project management viewpoint, from a best practices viewpoint, for the results of your project. The second important aspect to project closing is contract closure. You've had a number of contracts open for purchasing throughout the project. You need to have effective closure. You need to ensure that the final payments are made to your vendors. You need to ensure that the terms and conditions of the contract have been resolved and that all materials, all intellectual property, all fair trading, fair sharing through the contract process itself have been returned to the respective companies. Do not avoid, do not minimize, do not allow senior management to try to push you forward into the next project until you have successfully closed the current project you're on. As we'll see through this nugget, project closing provides significant benefits to the company, actually probably has the largest payback in terms of effort expended versus benefits for the company of any aspect to your project. And again, the benefits are gathering of the lessons learned, ensuring that we can repeat good things, and ensuring that we avoid making the same mistakes on future projects. Closing the project involves closing the project, transitioning the results of the project, the final deliverables, to the business. It's moving the ownership of the project, moving the ownership of the components delivered by the project from the project team itself to the business, i.e., we're implementing the results of the project. The business now owns the results. The business will now begin to use the results of our project to further the business, to improve operations for our company. Good, smooth transition is critical. Through the duration of the project, through the delivery of the project, your team has intimate knowledge, because they developed it, of course, your team has intimate knowledge of each and every piece of the project. They understand how it all fits together. They understand how to operate the results. They understand its issues, its benefits, its flaws, its weaknesses. They know how to make this final product, whatever the final product is, work successfully. We need to ensure that transition to the business is successful, that the business is properly trained, that the business understands how to operate the process, that the business or the operational support unit for your organization, where appropriate, fully understand how to implement the organization, how to continue the results of the system in the business. In one company that I worked with where I was delivering systems project, IT projects, software projects to a company, the transition to the business actually had three components. One is the business accepted. The business accepted saying, yes, this project, this software will satisfy my business requirements. The next component to transitioning to the business was the operations department. The operations department said, yes, we have reviewed the steps defined by the project for how the software will be used in the company. We understand what is required. We understand what backups need to be done. We understand what jobs need to be run. We, the operations department, fully understand what it's going to take to make the software run in the business for the next 2, 5, 10, 15 years, let's be optimistic, for how long the software is going to be in production in our company. And then finally, a final form of acceptance was the systems department. The IT department itself had to accept the project, saying, yes, we've reviewed the code, we've reviewed the results, we've reviewed exactly what the project has done, and we believe the system documentation, we believe the code is maintainable, we believe that the information provided to us by the project team will allow us to perform ongoing maintenance, to perform enhancements to the project. So don't minimize the effort and the importance of the transition, of the implementation of the project. As I say, a very formal company I've worked with, and I think this is an excellent strategy, had 3 levels of acceptance. The business accepted, saying, yes, this satisfies the problem. This allows us to run our business. The operations department accepted, saying, yes, we understand what it's going to take to make the software work in the company. And the systems department, the IT department itself, probably the very department you work for, has accepted and said, yes, we believe the project has followed the proper standards and procedures. We believe the code is well documented. We believe the systems documentation is appropriate to allow us to maintain and support this software, to perform enhancements, to deal with any bugs should they happen once the system has been in production. And as part of that transition, if any of these 3 acceptance processes said, no, this is unacceptable, the project was not completed. The implementation was not done. So ensure that you have successfully transitioned the responsibility, the ownership for the project, for the final results, to the business or to the appropriate other operational and systems department in your organization, the people that's going to maintain the system. That's final acceptance. It may be a single final acceptance, which is the most common, where the business itself accepts the project saying, yes, it's satisfied the objectives, the scope requirements have been addressed, the end result is exactly what we want to see in operation in our business. But as I said, there may be other levels of acceptance as well. I believe acceptance should be formal. I believe acceptance should be signature. I believe acceptance should be signature from both the business unit, saying, yes, this satisfies our requirements, and I believe acceptance should also contain your signature, the project manager's signature, that says, I, as a project manager professional, believe that I have delivered this project with sufficient due diligence, with sufficient care and attention, that I have delivered a quality product that I'm willing to put my name on. Final, formal acceptance truly closes the project. If you can think back to the very beginning of this entire CBT Nugget series on project management, we said projects are temporary. Projects have a defined beginning and end. With this formal acceptance, with this final acceptance, with the formal signature by both yourself and the business sponsor, you have satisfied that last component to our project definition. The project has a defined end. There is a true sense of closure. There is a true sense of accomplishment resulting from that final signature. As we discussed in the detailed nuggets, if formal signature is not something that is politically acceptable in your organization. It's foreign to your organization to have one department request signature from the business department. That's fine. Don't push it. But I would push it through at least an email saying, "Dear business sponsor, it's been great. I've really enjoyed working with you for these last 6, 8, 10 months for the project. It's been very refreshing and rewarding to me. And I'd just like to, with this final email, conclude that our project is successful, that the final results are exactly what you anticipated, and look forward to working with you on the next project. If for any reason you believe there are any flaws, any issues with the project, please let me know immediately so I can get them corrected before the project team is fully disbanded and assigned to other projects." Final acceptance, dealing with any holdbacks, any issues, any minor flaws that may be with outstanding. Because remember, again, we can have final acceptance with 3, 5, 10 cosmetic flaws in the system that must be addressed over the next 2 to 3 week period. Final acceptance, closing the project. I believe it's very important. I believe it gives you that sense of accomplishment. I really did something. The project is done. Somebody has put their signature on it. It makes you feel good. It should make the business feel good. And I'm going to put a dotted line across our screen right now. Many times, the first 2 steps of project closing happen. If the project concludes successfully, obviously there is a transition to business. It may not be as formal as I would suggest it should be, but if the project concludes successfully, the results are delivered to the business in one form or another and put into operation. So that aspect of closing always happens. The final acceptance, as they say, may not be politically correct, may be foreign to your organization, but by default, if it's been transitioned to the business, acceptance has happened. So that aspect of project closing for successful projects always happened. Where I think many organizations fall short is these last 2 aspects. The gathering of the lessons learned. What did we do well in this project? What do we want to repeat? What mistakes did we make? What lessons do we want to learn? What mistakes do we want to avoid in the future? Often never happens. And often the archival of the project artifacts never happens. The documentation, the results, the working products for the product sit around on a LAN drive somewhere in your organization for a period of time until that server is retired, until somebody is looking for more disk space. Archival of the project artifacts ensures that the project deliverables, the work products, everything produced by the product is preserved in a form, in a state, on a drive, on a CD somewhere, so that at any point in time in the future, whether it is 2 months later, 6 months later, or 2 years later, you need to get at something that was completed by the project, either to retrieve something from the project, to validate, to work through contract issues, or simply because someone in the organization says, "Hey, that project Steve delivered 2 years ago, he had a wonderful test plan. I would love to be able to take his test plan and reuse it." If the project artifacts are properly archived, that test plan can easily be found, retrieved, and reused going forward. So again, ensure that you get time from management to properly close the project, that the transition is smooth, that the final acceptance takes place, and that more importantly, I believe, for the organizational best health, best interest, that the lessons learned are gathered and consolidated and distributed, and that the project artifacts are archived so that they can be retrieved and reused in the organization on an as-required basis. A key but often overlooked component of project closing is the facilitation of organizational improvements, or in other words, making your organization a better project management machine as a result of what you learned, what you did on this project. How are you going to do that? Lunch and learns. In companies that I've worked for, there was a mandatory requirement at the end of each project. The project manager would gather their lessons learned, and they would facilitate a lunch and learn, a brown bag lunch, for all their fellow project managers. During the lunch and learn, again, the project manager would say, on this project, here's what we accomplished. Here's what I think we did a really good job of.
and here's what I would do better. Here are contractors I worked with. Here are products that I used. Here are methods that I've tried that worked extremely well, and I would highly recommend everyone reuse them. Or here are contractors that I've worked with, or materials that I've used, or methods that I've tried that really didn't work, and I can't envision any way that they could work. Or here are things that I tried that I think if I made these changes would work well. Do the lessons learned and make sure that everyone in your organization is aware of what worked and what didn't work. In order to ensure that the information from those lunch and learns carries forward, that they have longevity in your organization, that information should be brought forward and permanently saved. I'm saying put together a lessons learned folder on a network drive somewhere. Again, that way the synopsis, the good information and the bad information, what worked well, what didn't work well, can be saved, because although all project managers should strive to attend the lunch and learn, there will be instances where they simply can't make it, where there'll be instances where there are new hires in the project, into the organization rather, later, that didn't participate in the lunch and learns. Make that information permanently available and make it visible. Make sure all project managers know they're expected to go to the lessons learned folder as they're developing new project plans, to make sure they don't repeat past mistakes, and to make sure that they do repeat past successes. You need to ensure the visibility of the mistakes and the successes. Good projects don't happen by accident. Good projects happen as a result of the application of good practices. The way your organization is going to get good practices is to facilitate organizational improvement. Learn from each project. Make each successive project in your organization better as a result of successes repeated and mistakes eliminated from previous experience. As your project is winding down and coming to a close, you need to archive your project artifacts. You need to take all the material, all the documentation, each and every piece of information that your project produced, and archive it. Put it away somewhere that it can later be retrieved. You may be unfamiliar with using the term artifacts in terms of project documentation and project deliverables. It's a term that I've picked up recently, and it's stuck with me. And it's probably because of direct relevance. When I first think of artifacts, I think of archaeologists going out into deserts, sifting through sand, and trying to find little nuggets, little pieces of information that exist from the past that they can use to try to recreate the past. And why do I think that term is so appropriate to project documentation? Because I have had instances where I've had to go back to old projects and try to find the information. I've been aware that there was an excellent example that I wanted to reuse. Or I've had to go back to project documentation to reproduce an audit trail that was needed for accounting. Or I've had to go back to project documentation from past projects and recreate a document history to satisfy certain legal or certain organizational requirements. And at the time, I felt like I was an archaeologist in the middle of a desert, sifting through sand, looking for little tiny pieces of information because it was that hard to find. I found some information on a file folder on a network drive somewhere, which pointed me to another network drive, only to find out that that server had been decommissioned and was no longer in operation, to go to operations to find out, yes, there was a backup taken, and the tape is, and it just went on and on and on. It took hours to days to months of sifting through the sand, looking for the appropriate project artifacts. We want to eliminate that archaeological aspect to this. We want to archive the project artifacts. We want to take all of the documentation, all of the deliverables, every piece of information that the project delivered, and bring it together and put it in a single, focused, consolidated, managed area. If it's an electronic piece of documentation, all the electronic documentation should be gathered together into a common folder and zipped up and put on a protected drive somewhere so that we know it's going to be maintained and preserved on a go-forward basis. If it's paper-based documentation, it all needs to be gathered together, put into a single folder, put into a single box, put into a number of boxes depending on the size of and amount of documentation you have. Get it labeled and get it put into some kind of a permanent storage location, indexed and retrievable. That's why I find the term project artifacts to be so relevant, because I felt like that archaeologist out in the desert sifting through the sand. And it wasn't fun. If we do a proper job of archiving our project history, then we have true usable artifacts. And I've alluded to why we want to do this already. In some instances, it's going to be required by law. If your project is being delivered on a contract basis, your company is delivering it to another company for, a contract for money, there are absolute legal requirements for the period of time within which history, all history, status reports, action items, change requests, all pieces of information related to the project must be preserved by law, because there are times where the project can be challenged and so on. It may be required to be preserved by law for taxation rules. Again, depending on how your organization treats projects, some projects may be capitalized, which involves special tax treatment within the organization. And as soon as we start talking tax laws, there are absolute rules with how long information must be maintained in case the government comes back and does audit. So again, preserve all information. Don't try to second guess. Don't try to say, oh, I should preserve my high-level status reports to the project sponsor and I should preserve my change logs because I think that's what should be preserved for law, for accounting purposes. Don't try to second guess. Preserve all information. That way, if it's required, if there's an audit, if there's a legal challenge, if anyone ever wants to go back and review, it's all there in the box, on the drive, that's indexed and easy to get at. I also suggest we archive all artifacts for a more positive aspect. We want to make it accessible for future projects. Your project probably has delivered some extremely excellent work. Other projects are going to want to use some of your work as examples. On your project, you developed the world's most perfect system test plan. Someone at some future point in time is going to say, hey, Steve developed an excellent system test plan. I'd like to get an example of that. I'd like to reuse it. Makes it accessible for future projects. Allows your organization to develop templates. Allows your organizations, again, to make the good things on your project re-happen on future projects. If you archive your artifacts, you have the information that's there and available to make it accessible for future projects, to make the good things happen again. If your project involved contracting with third parties, you need to go through a formal contract closure with each of the third-party contracts in place in your organization. Some contract closures may have already taken place as third-party contracts closed throughout the duration of your project, but any contracts left open at your actual project closure need to again be formal closed. You need to go through the process to close the third-party contracts. The same as you're going to expect final closure and final acceptance on your project within your organization, you need to provide the same final closure to any third-party contracts that you are working within. You need to accept their deliverables. You need to satisfy the terms and conditions of the original contracts to make sure that both companies, because we want project-based contracts to be equal sharing contracts, not one way win-lose. We want all contracts to be win-win contracts. So we need to close the third-party contracts to make sure the rights, obligations, responsibilities of both companies, ours and our suppliers, are properly terminated. Often as a result of project delivery, there will be the sharing of information between contractors and your project. You need to ensure that all materials, all equipment, you may have equipment from your contractors, your suppliers on site that must be returned, or you may have supplied special material, special equipment to your contractors to allow them to complete their project work for you. Ensure that all material is returned to its rightful owners. Similarly, you need to ensure that all intellectual property, all documentation, all copyrighted materials is either returned or destroyed at the end of the project. So there's no obligation, there's no chances, there's no concerns that, again, your company has access to intellectual property licenses from your contractors that could accidentally get misused, or similarly, that your contractors have access to intellectual property licenses, copyrighted material that should be returned to your company. And again, in some cases it's return, in some cases it's just the confirmation that it's been destroyed. The material has been shredded, the information has been removed from hard drives, the information has been made unusable by the appropriate organization. And a key component, I believe, to contract closure, based on my experience, is provisions to release holdbacks and/or enact warranties. As your project is coming to a close, you're going to be repositioned, reallocated within the company, and go to work on new projects. You're going to take on new responsibilities. But typically, when you're dealing with third-party contracts, there is a period of time after project closure. You have 30-day, 60-day, 90-day holdbacks where 10% of the total contract value is held back to ensure there are no faults, there are no defects in the materials and the services supplied by your third-party contractors. At the end of the appropriate holdback period, that 10% needs to be paid. My experience is, as you are redeployed onto new projects, there's no one there to approve, to enact, to facilitate the payment of those holdbacks. Instead of your suppliers getting paid in the 30 days as they should, they submit their invoice, and no insult to accounting, it sits on accounting's desks for a week or two because accounting doesn't really know what to do with this anymore. That project's closed. I don't even remember who the project manager is. I'm not sure what to do with this invoice. If you put proper provisions in place, if you've told accounting, expect an invoice from ABC company in 30 days and 60 days, here's my pre-approval. When you get this invoice, please pay it. It's going to enact fast, prompt payment to our suppliers to ensure that, again, we can maintain good working relationships with all our third-party suppliers. Or on the other side, that if there's warranties, that someone is aware of the warranty periods so that if your supplier's material services have defects, the appropriate information is in place, that your successor, that the operations department, that whoever has the ongoing responsibility for the project is aware of the warranty conditions and can enact the warranty clauses and ensure that the remedy is properly applied quickly and efficiently for the company. Enact formal contract closure. Often, as I said, you are going to be redeployed in the organization. You're not there to look after these kind of closeout things as they dwindle in 30, 60, 90 days after the project is completed. Make sure you've got the processes in place to ensure this happens. This nugget is focused on the project closing process group. The last part for our project comes down to two core components: closing the project and closing the contracts we have in place with third parties. Closing the project can be summed up into gaining acceptance. Getting a signature on a piece of paper that says, Steve has satisfied the original intention for this project. We believe that this project absolutely satisfies our business requirements, and we're happy to go forward in the organization and use the results of this project. We want to improve the project management best practices. We want to gather the lessons learned, and we want to archive the artifacts. We want to make the project management processes in our organization more efficient, more effective as a result of what we learned from delivering this project. Take the time, ensure management gives you the time to properly close the project. My experience is, if there's one issue in project closing, is that it actually doesn't get done. There's always more projects to be done in a company than there's time to do them. Management simply says, the formal work has been done, acceptance has been provided. Yes, we understand that lessons learned and archiving of artifacts are important, but we have another project that's more important. As politely as you can without getting fired, you need to tell senior management that there is nothing more important than the day or 2 days, or worst case 5 days, required to gather the lessons learned and to archive the artifacts so that we can improve the project management best practices in our organization. If I can take 1 to 5 days to properly close my project, put this information in place, I could save hundreds, literally hundreds of days in future projects, because people are going to be able to improve their processes as a result of the good things that I've done or the mistakes that I've done on our project. And then we need to have contract closure. We need to deal with the third-party contracts, ensure that they're properly closed, ensure that processes are in place to release holdback payments and to enact warranties to ensure that all our third-party contracts are satisfied and that everyone is happy and that we have true win-win relationships in place in projects. Again, my experience is we may have a win-win relationship going with all of our subcontractors until we come to project closing and they start submitting their invoices for their holdbacks and their warranty support, and those invoices don't get paid, not because they didn't satisfy their requirements, simply because the project has been closed and no one is left behind to really understand what needs to be done and whether or not these invoices should be paid. So put the proper processes in place for contract closing for your third-party contracts, enact and ensure you have efficient and effective project closing in place, that your organization is improving its project management best practices as a result of the experiences you learned from this project, and your organization will be more successful going forward in project management. This concludes our nugget on project closing. I hope this video has been informative for you, and thank you very much for viewing.